In spite of dedicating an entire marathon of videos to this game, there's still a lot left to cover about Fire Emblem Fates, for better or worse. And strangely enough, one reoccurring topic that kept popping up over the course of the Fates-a-thon was the child units, as I went about discussing which were my favourites, who I felt had the best support, and the true extent of the developers' laziness. No, I'm not letting that go. The Deep Realm was bullshit! On the subject of the Deep Realm, just like in Awakening, the child units had their very own paralogues that needed to be completed in order to make them a part of the team. And I must say, these chapters were very peculiar for Fate standards, in the sense that I didn't think they were as straightforward and dull as some of the Birthright levels, not nearly as complex or punishing as the select few Conquest maps, and thankfully weren't loaded up the ass with gimmicks like pretty much all of Revelations. I felt the paralogues were generally very safe in regards to level design, and though in my opinion some of the maps sucked, you sir are a fucking idiot, I will openly admit there were some pretty solid, even standout levels, with these 10 in particular being the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. So join me everyone, as it's time to visit an old friend who I've been neglecting for quite some time, as I count down my top 10 favourite Fire Emblem Fates paralogues. As always, this is just my personal opinion, and I'm ranking these chapters based on how much I enjoyed them. So if a paralogue isn't on here that you enjoyed, or you don't agree with my choices, that's fine, you have every right to disagree. Also, I'm not including the DLC stuff, just what is available in the base games. And with all that cleared up, I think it's about time I went back to Fate and gave it more attention, the same way the first generation characters left their children to grow up on their own and only now need them to fight in their war. Wow, you are horrible parents! Sweet dreams. For this first entry, it was a toss-up between the current placeholder and Hidden Bravery, and while I do like both levels, I'm personally a bigger fan of Little Miss Sleepyhead's predicament, thanks to having in my opinion a more unique layout, being the more challenging chapter, incorporating a rather peculiar method of recruitment, and making for an overall better experience. So sorry Siegbert, but you're not going to be on this one, but it's okay, I'm sure your dad will understand. Father, forgive me, I failed to make the top 10.
You're dead to me.
Mitima's paralogue certainly made me work hard to get her lazy ass out of bed, as unlike the majority of recruitable units, you need to speak to her no less than 3 times before she joins you during this level, though it should be noted that she will become a member of the team once the chapter is complete, regardless of whether or not you speak to her. Because of this slightly unnecessary prerequisite, there was that extra bit of incentive for me to reach the house as soon as possible, which is easier said than done as the layout of the map limits movement significantly unless the dragon veins are used to freeze the water, allowing both me and my opponents more freedom to move about the map. While this level can be tackled at a very casual pace, I feel going out of your way to obtain Mitima as early as possible adds the real challenge to this map, and makes for quite the rush, as I observed that the enemy positioned themselves in a more defensive formation, which required me to have to push hard in order to break through their ranks, and once I reached the centre, the enemy suddenly did a 180 and began advancing towards me, now putting me on the defensive and helping to keep things interesting. Though it must be said that a select few foes will not actively go out of their way to attack you, which does admittedly take away some of the urgency of this chapter, and those berserkers are an absolute joke. I mean, look at you, you're just standing there practically begging to get your ass kicked. Charlotte, what do you think of this?
You disgust me!
My thoughts exactly. Nevertheless, this was a fun level that rewarded those who don't waste their time in dawdle, with a unit who wastes most of her time dawdling. Ha! Saizo vs Saizo. It's no secret at this point that I'm not a fan of the Birthright Awakening clones, but as bad as they were to me, I must say their paralogues were definitely the best part about obtaining them, except for Rajat. Nobody likes faceless! Thankfully, Saizo's son was kind enough to offer up something I considered to be far more interesting in the form of a rather intense and unique level that was one of the few moments in Birthright that I felt was somewhat difficult. I know, right? Birthright and difficult in the same sentence? What's next? Limp performing while in Blazing Sword? Well, I'll be damned. This map is probably one of the shortest in the game, as once Asugi reaches the exit or dies, you lose, making it so that you have to defeat the boss ASAP. Though word of advice, don't try and rescue Asugi at the start, because he will exit the map from where you entered, something I've never attempted, but I know a select few who found that out the hard way. So with the objective clear as day, this chapter is all about plowing through the masses as quickly as possible, so I would personally recommend units with strong offense or high movement, not to mention any extra units who can use Dragon Veins or Lock Touch, because without them, you're not winning this map. Well, I did it without using either. Fuck you and the guy next to you.
Hey!
Due to the numerous amount of map conditions, I found this Paralogue to be very exciting, as it felt like something a little different as far as Birthright levels go, and from start to finish I was fully invested, especially since there was a fairly good amount of enemy variety here, which made me think very carefully about which units to send in while still maintaining momentum. But then I remembered that this is Birthright and use Ryoma. Why are the rest of you even here? But in all seriousness, though I think this chapter is cool, it's also really short and is pretty much over as soon as it starts, which I understand is meant to be the point, but holy hell does the experience feel short-lived. But hey, I still had a good time in this map, and I'll gladly take a short burst of fun rather than a dragged out snorefest. Bold Approach. Since Silas appears very early on in 2 of the Fates pathways and has a high amount of support options, Bold Approach was one of the earliest Paralogues I, and I'm sure many others, were able to experience. And for what it's worth, I thought it made for a rather pleasant one. Admittedly, this is a relatively straightforward level, but to me, the simplicity is part of the charm, and I always find it to be a fun time. Which is strange when taking into account that there are green units in this chapter, and we all love green units, don't we? I hate this series. The story of this chapter is that Silas's daughter Sophie stumbles out of the Deep Realm and finds herself in the midst of a scuffle, and being the brave knight that she is, she charges in gallantly in order to save the poor villagers. The only problem is that depending on how far you are into the story, she's shit and has to rely on us to do her dirty work. I would be more upset, but you remind me of a certain somebody I love, so I'll let you off easy.
This time.
As it stands, the name of the game is to defeat the boss and rescue the villagers, and if you want to reach those NPCs before they walk to their doom, I say using mounted units is the ideal strategy, which is good news for all you low turn count players, though it must be said that you don't have to keep them alive, but doing so gets you energy drops and a partner seal, so I think the effort is worth it, or at least it would be if they didn't purposely get themselves killed. Are you people even trying? Though the chapter isn't anything too special, I find it to be a rather fun and nice early game paralogue to get players familiar with what to expect later down the line. Not to mention the lack of enemy variety, while I'm not usually too happy about, makes it easier to prioritise rescuing the villagers and deciding on which units will be able to survive on the front lines, though based on how many sorcerers and berserkers there are, I think Leo makes for the ideal meat shield. Or a Xander, whichever floats your boat. It may seem a bit queer that I've put what looks to be a rather middle of the road map on this list, but to be honest, that's kind of par for the course when it comes to Fates Paralogues, and this one just so happened to do that little bit extra to earn it a spot on the countdown. I guess you're useful for something, Sophie. Now explain to me again how the skill Mischievous works. I need it for research purposes. Truly talented. Once again, the Birthright Awakening clones show that there's more to them than just blatant pandering. Really, cause you could have fooled me. As Miss Caldori is not only my favourite character of the 3, but also has my favourite Paralogue too. As upon reflection, I found it to be one of the more strategic levels, where the difficulty varied greatly depending on which units were selected, and was a very pleasant time. Not to mention that conversation at the end with Severa, even I had to admit was pretty good. I love it when things come full circle. One of the best things about Caldori's Paralogue is that unlike a lot of the child units, she joins you at the very start of the chapter, so you basically get a free bonus unit, and thankfully her class really benefits this map. Even though the objective is a route mission, I noticed that the level layout is structured a lot like a defense map, with my units being very boxed in at the start and having access to a number of forts to better fortify themselves. And it's a good thing too, because when it comes to Hoshido, aside from a very small number of units, what the fuck is a defense stat? I'm actually a big fan of this type of map design, as I feel it can work both ways due to there being more than enough space to charge the enemy at the start, but conversely, playing a bit more steadfast can be just as effective and help to mitigate the large onslaught at the beginning, and this really shows if you choose lance or shuriken based units, as this map is filled with heroes, paladins and sorcerers, so I would personally advise against using any axe or bow units. But being perfectly honest here, aside from Takumi, were you using either of these two to begin with? I mean, I was, but that's just me. All in all, I find this chapter to be fun, but what seals the deal is the conversation that arises if Severa is Caldori's mother. Everything about this interaction is just unbelievably heartwarming, and it truly feels like Severa has come full circle with her character arc, so I have to give it bonus points for that. And when it comes to the Birthright Awakening clones, I think the damage has been done at this point, but I will openly acknowledge good things about them if they deserve it. And well, I think Caldori's Paralogue definitely deserves a place on this list, for being a pretty good chapter and having a pretty sweet send-off for Severa. I'm sure somewhere out there, your mother is smiling blissfully. Because she's the one in Warriors and you're not. Dragonblood. It really says something in Fire Emblem when your child is an optional character and yet they completely outshine you. Okay, that's not actually too surprising since there are quite a few child units that I personally prefer over their parents, but it's usually only by a little bit. Kana, however, is someone I find to be much greater than her loaf of bread of a father, so I'm making it a priority to get her as early as possible. And it's a good thing her Paralogue was so much fun to tackle too, being in my opinion quite the gauntlet of a level and really emphasizing the use of specific units and their placement. It's a good thing I like to have variety in my team. I don't think even Korin could solo this one. Some father you turned out to be. Not counting Mozu's chapter, Dragonblood is more than likely the first Paralogue players tackled in all pathways, as Korin is there from the start and can get with whoever he wants since, well, he's the whore. And for such an early Paralogue, I felt it made for a rather good impression, and quite the demanding one at that. The goal in this map is to rout the enemy and protect Kana, not that she needs it, and from the start the opposing force was ready and waiting to dogpile me. Ideally, I find taking up defensive positions to be a significant benefit early on, as I noticed that the same types of enemies are bunched up together across the map, and I found that sending the correct units to intercept them made a huge difference. Otherwise, I wasn't coming back from that deep realm in one piece. I'd argue this map really favours class diversity, as certain units can really turn the tide of battle in my favour, and since I'm the type of person that likes to run varied team compositions in Fire Emblem as a whole, this Paralogue was right up my alley. I also like how the dragon veins work in this level, since the map layout can be either very restricted or very spacious depending on whether or not they are activated, which can change the entire dynamic and give the chapter what I feel to be a substantial sense of freedom. I will admit, after the first couple of waves, the map does become pretty easy, but those first few turns make for a very cathartic experience, and in the end, it was all worth it to recruit the little bundle of joy that is Kana. As if I wasn't a sucker for adorableness enough at this point. Ultimate power. I find it very ironic that Odin, from my experience, is one of the weakest purely magic-based users in Fates, and yet his daughter often turns out to be one of the strongest. I would say sucks to be him, but Heroes and Revelations have already screwed him over enough as is. Back on the subject of ultimate power, you're gonna need it for this level. Holy hell, can this chapter be a right nasty piece of work, and man did it push me to my limits when trying to collect everything and keep my team alive, making this in my opinion one of the hardest, but at the same time most rewarding Paralogues in the game. Plus there are harder Paralogues out there for all the wrong reasons. Shiro, would you please stay fucking still? It's pretty much unanimous that Conquest is the most difficult of the Fates pathways, and in my opinion that holds true for the Paralogues too. In this particular instance, not only did I have to deal with a bucket load of enemies and a wide assortment of different classes to boot, but there are also 4 houses to visit which host some damn good items like Calamity Gate and Horse Spirit that would be a crime to miss out on. I'll tell you something, once I gave those to Nick, she was making Soren look like a scrub. Damn girl, you really are underrated. Plus, there are quite a lot of respawning units too, all of which combined made my time throughout this chapter very daunting, and if you're not careful, it is very easy to get killed. But that's precisely what makes this level feel so rewarding to complete, as getting all the bonus items and overcoming the enormous enemy force felt so good to conquer. I'll give props to this chapter for not being bullshit like some of the other Conquest levels. Fucking endgame, even your Grand Hero battle is shit! As number of starting units notwithstanding, the enemies spawn quite far away from the action and there's a lot of different types of terrain to take advantage of, which gave me enough time and space to adapt to each new threat, making this a very tough but fair level that I enjoyed a lot and was very rewarding to complete. The only downside being that I was forced to bring Odin, who last time I checked...
And Odin Dark falls.
Yeah. Bright Smile. I stated previously that the Paralogues and Fates were very middle of the road when it came to map design, and while I think that's true for the majority of them, Soleil's level is truly something special, and in my eyes one of the most well designed and unique maps in the game, and it just so happens to originate from the Conquest route, go figure. Though this is not my personal favourite map, I cannot deny just how well structured and perplexing I found it to be, not to mention one of the few Fire Emblem chapters with green units who can actually do something. My love for you grows stronger every day. Bright Smile was always one of the stranger Fire Emblem maps in my eyes, as the entire setup is like a giant maze, making movement very restricted and having a substantial amount of choke points. Speaking of which, the idea of this chapter is to try and save Soleil and as many of the NPCs as possible while routing the enemy, and as there are so many passageways and entry points, this map is about locking them off and holding out as long as possible. From my experience, this chapter was a massive endurance round, but the real strategy lies in how quickly I was able to reach the soldiers and what units to use when blocking down certain sections of the map, as I was hit by a barrage of reinforcements, causing me to think hard about the long term, in addition to where I should best place the obstacles that can be used to block off passages. Word of advice, drop them in the southwest, and for the love of God, use flying unit. You'll thank me later. I won't deny that this chapter can be exceedingly arduous and rather frustrating when the enemy numbers start to become overwhelming, but I greatly admire how the map encourages me to adapt to my surroundings and think outside the box. Not to mention, the game was kind enough to give soldiers javelins and wearied fighters, so unlike most green units, they can actually survive for a bit on their own. Took you fucking long enough. And when all is said and done, I think this was a great level that tried something different and succeeded with a bright smile. Abrupt Clash. Children will often fight with their parents for various different reasons. Pride, relationship issues, hormones, harboring resentment for a father who abandoned his offspring at such a young age and not coming back for his wife's funeral, leading the two sons to try and bring her back with alchemy, only to lose their bodies and go on a journey that will put them through unfathomable amounts of hardship and pain. You know, typical stuff. When it comes to Niles and Nina, it's a case of clashing ideals, with said clash erupting into one heck of a great chapter that made me fight tooth and nail for those bonuses and goaded me into approaching the situation a little differently. After all, that is the point of playing Fire Emblem, right? To think about things from a multitude of perspectives and use an assortment of tactics to overcome each obstacle, or at the very least that's why I play Fire Emblem, and why I don't use J-Guns unless it's hard mode. I'd rather not put the game on autopilot. Even though she's Niles' daughter and joins your team at the end, you actually have to defeat Nina before she escapes in order to clear this chapter, which in of itself isn't difficult, but you'd think they'd remove the slow motion death animation to prevent confusion. You people can be really misleading, you know that. Anyway, that's the premise and it's fairly straightforward. However, the real meat of the map comes from obtaining the treasure, as very early on 3 different thieves will come and steal it, making it so that I had to either get there first or stop them from escaping. Though it is purely optional, I feel it adds that extra bit of flavour to the map as the outlaws have a significant head start, and because of how the enemies are laid out, trying to move as quickly as possible without careful planning can be potentially fatal. So I had to be very careful about whom to bring, how to use them, and trying out more unorthodox methods of working around this particular predicament. This is a chapter that I felt inspires an extensive amount of experimentation and made for one of the most memorable paralogues in Fates, as whenever I tackled this map it has been a completely different experience each time. And I appreciate how creative this map made me play when it came to the various different ways of getting all that booty. Even when disregarding the bonus items, I still thought this chapter was pretty good, with a nice layout, decent enemy variety and so on. But it's all the additional elements that make it one of my favourites, though due to how enemy scaling works, I would recommend Niles knocking up someone as soon as possible. Spread 'em, Perry. As obtaining the treasure when this chapter has promoted units can be a huge pain in the... And there it goes with my goal. I quit! Fuck this game. Abducted. When it comes to Fire Emblem, I'm the type of player that keeps every single unit alive until the very end. It doesn't matter how they fare objectively or what I think of their character, no one dies when I play Fire Emblem. Not even this stupid son of a bitch. So with this in mind, when a band of brigands threatens to lay their dirty fingers on my fabulous little forest, you can bet your ass I held nothing back when taking them down. And funny enough, neither did they, as this was one of the most unyielding paralogues I've tackled in Fates, but also resulted in one of the most thought-provoking and interesting paralogues I've had the pleasure of playing. So even though they tried to kill myself and my team, I've got to hand it to these bandits, they made for quite the adrenaline rush. Now get the fuck out of my sight! Before all the fighting begins, Elise goes on and on about how much she's looking forward to meeting her grown-up nephew Forrest. However, Leo is not so keen, and after Forrest pulls a Libra on Elise, Leo quickly snaps at his son for the way he dresses and the fact that he's different. This is the part where I would make a remark about Leo being a shit dad, but he didn't exactly have the best role model now, did he? Unfortunately, because of all that bickering, Forrest runs off and gets kidnapped by a bunch of brigands who also mistake him for a female and plan on selling him for money. I must say, it's a good thing they didn't try anything more detestable, because they'd be in for quite the surprise.
Alright, pretty thing, show me the good stuff.
That's not right.
So with Forrest now a prisoner, it's up to Leo and the others to rescue him. But doing so is no walk in the park, as the enemy will be continuously advancing on Forrest and you have to make it through the main force before they reach him. This chapter by design has quite a bit of pressure going in, but fortunately there is also a lot of leeway in regards to how I was able to tackle the state of affairs, as from my experience running through the middle entrance is the quickest way but also the most difficult. However, flanking from behind and picking off the smaller groups of enemies despite taking longer is also less risky and can be more efficient in the long term. I admire how even though this map essentially has a time limit, There's more than enough space to breathe and implement different methods of attack instead of being railroaded into just bum rushing the front lines and praying that the RNG favours you, because in my experience that's usually not the best strategy, and oh look, you died.
Dumbass!
Adding to that is the treasure to obtain, and I find the layout to be just right, not too spacious and just narrow enough to have a decent number of choke points. Plus, it's not like the enemy is moving at light speed, so there's no major rush, but I wouldn't advise dawdling too much as Forest is pretty damn frail. I guess the best way to sum this chapter up is balanced. More specifically, how it finds the right equilibrium between different extremes that by themselves would probably make for a pretty bad map. It's tense and time-based, but not forceful or used as a way of fake difficulty. The layout is large and constricted, but not a chore to cover or too limited to move about in. It's what I consider to be a really great level and one of my favourites in the game. So even though Leo might have been a bit of an ass to his son, if it means I get to go through the pleasure of rescuing him, I'll gladly turn a blind eye. I know that sounds awful, but honestly, compared to some Fire Emblem parents, Leo's Father of the Year. Herbal Remedy. And would you look at that, Midori takes the #1 spot once again. You'd think after winning the award for best child unit that would be enough for her, but apparently 1 gold medal simply won't cut it. And oh man, is this chapter pure gold. While I wouldn't call this the most unique, challenging or exhilarating map, Herbal Remedy still ticks all the boxes in addition to having quite the number of standout qualities that make it for me personally the most fun I've had playing through any of the Paralogues in Fire Emblem Fates. So it's no surprise that Midori ended up in first place once again. Slightly predictable, yes, but hey, it's not like the other Paralogues mirror my favourite child units, aside from Forest and Nina and Ophelia. I swear this is not intentional. The purpose of this map is to defeat the boss Candice, who has stolen Midori's dragon herbs. Is that what you kids call weed these days? And what I find so great about this map is the way in which you go about doing so is entirely up to you. This chapter is essentially a game of cat and mouse, with Candice always being on the move, so I had to try and either keep up with or outflank her while making sure not to get blindsided by the enemies, which to me adds a surprisingly strategic element to this map, and thanks to both the layout and how the dragon veins work, it lends itself to various ways of achieving this. If I wanted to, I could end the map straight away, or I could purposely go back and forth to keep Candice around for as long as possible, and use that time to kill all the enemies. I could fly over the trees, lock down the enemy forts, EXP grind the generals at the top, you name it. This is what makes me love this chapter so much, as there really is no wrong way to play it, unless you do something stupid and die, and because of just how much freedom the map lends itself to, I find myself trying out all different manner of methodologies when trying to complete this level. I frankly cannot get enough of this chapter and just how much fun I find it to be, and I'm especially happy it's available on every pathway. Plus, as a bonus, Midori fights alongside you from the start, and is the only non-enemy apocryphy in the game. And if you like, you can catch a Candice and make her a part of your team as well. And considering there are more Pegasus Knights in Conquest than there is Hector Hard mode, you'd best be ready to snag that top of Lard as if she were a Snorlax. I think it's clear by now as to why Herbal Remedy is my favourite Paralogue in the game. Sure, it's not perfect and other levels have more originality or a better sense of challenge, but the way in which this chapter caters to an infinite number of playstyles and just how much fun it is to try out new methods of completing this map made for the best time I had going into that godforsaken Deep Realm, which is why it takes the #1 spot as my favourite Paralogue in Fire Emblem Fates. This has been BLAZINKNIGHT. I wish you all a great night, take care, and though bringing child units back for Fates was lazy and the concept of the Deep Realm was even lazier, I will admit it made for some pretty good characters, along with maps that were just as good to go along with them. I guess every cloud has a silver lining after all. Thank you all for watching today, I hope you had a great time and enjoyed the video. Please let me know what you thought in the comments and what are some of your favourite Paralogues in Fire Emblem Fates. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all my patrons that help support the channel, and shoutouts go to Chaos Sabereye, Justin Konovich, Samuel Line, Nate Perkins, Vanessa Westfall, Midnight Castle, Patanko Fan 32, Tivis James Little 4, Almont, Vinton Clark, Jeremy Redinger, The Main Idea, Perfect Oblivion, Maggie Fall, Veridin8392, and Zenny Dragon. Thank you all so much for your constant love and support and for making these videos possible. And if you want to go the extra mile, why not consider donating to my Patreon in order to help support the channel and receive some very nice bonuses, which I hope will be worth your much appreciated investment. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.